We're all familiar with stories of NHS waste. Over the last 5 years, £1 billion has been spent on outsourcing X-ray, CT and MRI scans to the private sector. And Labour have now pledged today to double scanning capacity to help relieve the health service.
Let's cross to the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. Wes, how do you pay more? So how do you double scanning output without paying more?
Well, we've committed £171 million to double the number of CT and MRI scanners over the course of the Parliament. And that's not just more scanners, it's AI-enabled technology, which means that we can get through more people faster, which in some cases will be transformational in terms of the outcomes. For stroke patients, for example, we know that every second counts. We think we can treble the number of people who experience stroke and come out on the other side without a lasting disability. And if you think about what that means for someone in terms of their ongoing health, their quality of life and the care that they may or may not need if we get to them fast enough, that would be transformational. And our frustration is that in the last 5 years or so, the government spent £1 billion on outsourcing those scans because we don't have enough scanners in the NHS. And we're also seeing the number of scans undertaken by the private sector going down. So we're paying more and getting less. And that's why we want to make sure the NHS has the equipment it needs as well as the staff it needs to treat patients on time.
The outlay for equipment like that, it is so expensive. You're talking about tens of millions of pounds per unit.
Well, it's £171 million in total we've committed to it, and that's funded as part of the £1.6 billion package for the NHS from the non-dom tax status. So that's a fully costed, fully funded commitment that would make a real difference.
I tell you, this non-dom tax status, where's this? This is the pill, the panacea for everything. This is because every time we hear every time we hear a policy from Labour, it will be paid by the non-dom tax status or private schools.
I'm going to break this down for you. The non-dom tax status, a conservative estimate, small c conservative estimate, raises £2 billion or so. We've committed £1.6 billion of that to the NHS, and the rest goes to primary school breakfast clubs so that every child starts the day with hungry minds instead of hungry bellies. Those are the only policies that are funded by abolishing the non-dom tax status. And of that £1.6 billion, we can afford the scanners. We can afford £111 million for NHS dentistry. Goodness knows they need that. And 2 million more appointments a year to cut NHS waiting lists by putting £1.1 billion into evening and weekend clinics, which have been proven to work in a small number of hospitals, including the hospital I can see from my office window in Parliament. But they should be available to people right across the country, not just to people in London and the South East.
I think those people who aren't in favour of scrapping the non-dom tax status say that what happened in France when this kind of legislation was brought in was that all of those wealthy people left the country. In fact, a lot of them came over to here in London, and then, of course, that revenue could well leave the country when you bring that policy in. But that will be for us to see if and when that's to happen. But on this issue of scanners, and I just look to what's happening in Wales almost whenever we talk about a sort of Labour situation, because obviously Labour running the NHS there. Professor Carol Sikora is writing in the Express Days, a regular on this channel. He says today, politicians from all parties pontificate with the usual confected outrage when it comes to delivering change. It's the same old story of all talk and no action. He says patients are enduring torturous delays and there are world-class cancer facilities in Newport that remain completely unused. He says it's a national scandal. Why are we not using these cancer facilities in Newport?
Well, I think Carol Sikora's trying to push his Rutherford centres, which exist across the whole country, and I'm something we'd be prepared to look at. But my understanding is that there have been value for money studies on that, and no government has taken that up. I would take the fundamental challenge, though, that the NHS is in crisis right across the United Kingdom, and before we all engage in a council of despair and say, oh, it's inevitable and no politicians can change anything, look at the record of the last Labour government that delivered the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in history. And in fact, just this weekend at the Scottish Labour conference, because of the money we've committed to the NHS in England, should Labour win the general election, we've got Labour's health spokesperson in Scotland, Jackie Bailey, talking about how the money that would go to Scotland from Labour's policies can also be used to cut waiting lists there. I know Labour colleagues in Wales feel the same, so we'll create a rising tide that lifts all ships across the United Kingdom, just as we did when we were last in government.
Now, since you mentioned the Scottish Labour conference yesterday, you see, Wes, I look at you, I talk to you, I look at you and I think, top man, very good communicator. I wouldn't expect you to be as stilted and as wooden.
You said keep him waiting before the break. I heard what you said.
There you go, see?
Yeah, but you can't wait. I don't care. You can wait.
I'm on the telly.
Tried.
Yeah.
I heard what you said.
Yeah, oh, that's good. Did Kay Burley hold you up? It was really her I was getting at.
Yeah, Kay gave me a cup of tea in the warm, that's all I'm saying. So.
Now, listen, Keir Starmer, right, if this was you yesterday, talking about Gaza and what's going on, I would see you like this. You would say, now, in the past, I've said that there should be a temporary ceasefire and whatever because I believe that this is what was going to happen. So yesterday they called for a full ceasefire, full-out ceasefire, and people don't know if they're coming or going. What is Labour's view on this? Yes, yesterday was Labour's definitive view on it. But why can't this man pick a side to be on, pick a role and stick to it?
Well, Keir has, but in common with the rest of the international community, what Keir's sought to do is act in lockstep with our allies in the region, countries like Jordan, Egypt and Qatar that are doing a hell of a lot of diplomatic heavy lifting behind the scenes to try and bring an end to this crisis, as well as the United States, which has a good degree of influence here as well. And throughout the crisis, what you've seen from Labour, as you've seen from the wider international community, is an escalation of both the concern that we have about the disproportionate loss of civilian casualties and the public rhetoric that we are using in response, and indeed the tactics that are being deployed by countries in response. And generally speaking, on foreign policy, we try not to be divisive and to pick party political dividing lines, because we want to speak with one voice as a country, and indeed in this conflict we want to speak as one voice as the international community where we can too. And that's why you've seen that evolution of language. But Keir's been calling for a ceasefire for some time now, but what Keir has been clear about and honest with protesters and other people who are concerned is that a ceasefire isn't something that can be imposed by Britain or the international community. It's something that can only be agreed by both parties to the conflict, and that's the challenge that we're currently up against, and so far has eluded us.
Yeah, OK, we understand there's a sort of widespread hardening of the position, but what about this vote in Parliament this week being forced by the SNP? How will Labour be voting on it? Will they be voting with their feet in favour of a ceasefire? Will you be voting in favour of a ceasefire?
Well, we'll be setting out our own position. We'll wait and see the final SNP motion, but I think we'll be setting out our own position this week, and there'll be more to say about that, no doubt, very shortly. But look, Keir has been clear for weeks and months now, actually, that we want to see an end to this bloody conflict. We're desperately concerned and appalled by the disproportionate number of civilian casualties. Let's not forget that Hamas are still holding innocent Israelis hostage. They must be released. And we've got now the real prospect of Palestinians being pushed into the desert from Rafah. And so this is a crisis that could worsen. I gather overnight the Israelis have said, look, we're not going to go into Rafah until early March. Hamas have got an opportunity to release the hostages. Let's hope Hamas do that, because however critical we are of Israel for going beyond reasonable self-defence and looking at the disproportionate loss of innocent lives, let's not forget that on the 6th of October last year there was a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. On the 7th of October, Hamas chose to launch this barbaric attack, and that's how this round of the latest chapter of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict unfolded. But ultimately, we're not going to see a violent end to this conflict. We only can see an end to this conflict through a peaceful, diplomatic, two-state solution, and that's what Labour will always push for.
Wes Streeting, well put. Thank you very much indeed. Les is Labour's Shadow Health Secretary.
Thank you.
And something, thank you. No, don't just thank me after this. Someone go and get that man a cup of tea. He's been hanging around here for some inexcusable reason, and his feet are freezing.